You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans and special guests, as told to Mayor Rahm Emanuel.
Welcome to Chicago Stories. I'm Bill Kurtis. A surprise. A surprise. We're going to turn the tables here on.
I hear the mayor's sick.
We're going to find out. Yeah. But this will be fun because this is the final of 95, probably a 96 episode that you love. This was really a good idea. What gave you the idea?
It was two things. At dinner, which we made minimum 4 nights a week as a family, I would tell, obviously what happened that day. And usually I'd come up with somebody I met that was fascinating or some story about a person. And Amy, because I go to sleep early, stays up usually a little later, and she listens to podcasts.
Really?
Yeah, I don't.
Uh-huh.
And she would tell, this podcast or this one about this murder story, et cetera, or whatever. And one day, while I was swimming, I was saying, you know what? I should share my stories with other people because I meet people. You're fortunate as a mayor. You're all over the city. And you meet people that other people may find as interesting as you do.
I would think.
And so I found out that there was no other mayor doing a podcast.
Wow.
And I think the mayor of Perth, Australia, is now replicating the idea, et cetera. And so anyway, that became the genesis of people I meet through being mayor. That I think other people in Chicago who love the city may find them fascinating. What they're doing, what they wrote, their book would be fascinating.
Well, as a producer, it's an easy book. And let's call that the first episode of many that you will be writing. So maybe we should start at the beginning of This Is Your Life. People will be interested in why you got into politics in the first place. And I think it was the period of the 80s, let's say 1980. And maybe you had an idea. When I was getting into broadcasting, Walter Cronkite was the king. And they said, we always wanted to be Walter Cronkite. Well, I never thought I could be that. But I kind of vaguely knew this was an area that I wanted to pursue. But David Robinson is a name out of the past.
Yeah, I have to actually give credit to my mother. All social activism starts in our house with my mother. She ran, or was one of the originators behind CORE, Congress on Racial Equality, here in Chicago. We went to demonstrations with her, integration of beaches and housing in Chicago. One funny story, Grandpa Herman was over for a Sabbath dinner, and my mom and grandfather, her father, had a huge argument about Wallace. It's 1968, and you would think it was George Wallace. And I asked our dad what they were arguing about because it was so loud and there was nothing quiet about the Emanuel household. They were still arguing about Henry Wallace breaking from the party in 48, 20 years later. But one summer, I worked on a campaign and I got the bug. As the candidate's driver. Now, if you ask my high school friends, they would say, Rahm was always interested in politics. It was that moment. And everything else I'd done in college was about early childhood education. And I either found it or it found me, or that was the first campaign.
Was it the excitement of driving and having access to the thing? And
I never thought of it until you said, I haven't driven a car in 10 years from chief of staff to mayor. So I'm ending the career. It was being around politics. And it was at that campaign that I figured out that I had a knack for fundraising.
And you do?
And I ended up postponing my senior year in college, and I stayed that semester. He ran against Paul Finley. He lost, and I stayed that semester, finished the campaign, took time off after he lost, and then I went back to school and finished the spring semester and then the following winter semester.
I had a cousin who was riding along during the 68 fires on the west side, and we were trying to stay ahead of the riot as it was moving down Madison. And it was so exciting, he decided to go in to broadcast, practically ruined his life. So
that led to one other thing. When I got out of college, I ended up working for Citizen Action, Illinois Public Action Council.
Yeah.
And that led to them working on Lane Evans' race and Dick Durbin's congressional race.
Yeah.
And each thing led to something else.
But it wasn't an immediate jump to working for the president.
No.
You were there with social issues.
Yeah, and actually, Illinois Public Action Council was about environmental discrimination and dumping in poor areas and expensive utility bills where people didn't feel like they had any say through the ICC.
Yeah. But then you did specialize in finance. And you moved into the DNCC, and you became chairman, didn't you? Finance chairman, vice chairman.
Yeah, well, I did stuff with the two things. I did fundraising for help Paul Simon, and then I did fundraising to help Mayor Daley. I did political work helping the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and then I ended up moving to Little Rock to be then Governor Bill Clinton's.
Really?
Yeah, who was at a whopping 3% in the polls.
Why would you choose that?
Two things. Yeah, so
the horse had two broken legs.
Bill, I mean, you're exact. My dad, in his thick Israeli accent, what are you, an idiot? Because at that point, Bill Bradley and Mario Cuomo were the titular heads. They were going to be, everybody thought maybe Bill Clinton would be vice president at best, and he still had the 1988 horrible convention speech. And two things. One is when I was political director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Congressman Burl Anthony from Arkansas was the chair. So every time we went on a recruitment drive, we would go to, not every time, but regularly, to Arkansas. Okay. And we would run into and meet this guy called Governor Bill Clinton. He came up to give a speech. Remember when Vince Lane ordered the police into the public housing and shut it down? He came up and supported that. And I saw him, and that became the basis of a friendship or relationship, kind of some conversation. And I thought he had I couldn't physically put my hand on it, but I thought he had the thing.
Wow.
And I've always wanted to work for a candidate. I always wanted to go to the White House. That was a drive. And I decided that I didn't want to go with what the establishment, Bill Bradley, Jay Rockefeller, Mario Cuomo.
The easy choices.
Yeah, the conventional choices. Yeah. So I went the unconventional route.
Did he say, now, Rom, why don't you come along and we'll make history?
He said, Bill, this is a great idea. I love Chicago. I don't know if you know this. Hillary's from Chicago. I just love this city, and I really like your pizza, too.
You're better than I am.
Well, you get yelled at for 8 years in a row. You get to pick up on it.
Did he yell? I've never seen him mad and shouting. No.
Oh, my God. Well, yes. So the short answer is yes. But you knew... It took you about 6.5 years, but he yelled, but it was just blowing off steam. He could yell at you and go red-faced, and the next moment he'd ask you to sit down and play hearts. It was just, he got it out of his system, and he had it scream bloody murder at you. And then, you're ruining my life, all this stuff you got to make me do. And then it would just be over. It was just like a storm that passed.
Yeah.
And it took me 7 years to realize, and when I was finally done, that it was just a storm.
Yeah. He didn't hate you after all.
But I'll tell you this, when you're sitting in the Oval Office and you have the President of the United States yelling at you,
you take it.
It's kind of intimidating. Yeah.
You take it. Are there any moments that you can pull out as lessons? I mean, my God, you were there in the Oval Office.
From Bill Clinton?
Yeah.
Hundreds of lessons. I mean, I talked about one that's applicable to when I just did the symphony. He says, produce the document. Don't let the other side produce it. If you produce it, everybody has to work off of your stuff. That was his little trick. And then I tell this story, but one of my favorite, so we're negotiating, trying to get NAFTA done.
Yeah.
And Bill Clinton has John Breaux, senator out of Louisiana, he says, and Breaux sits in what would then be the vice president chair right next to the president in the Oval. He goes, John, what I got to do to get your vote, man? I really need this. And Senator Breaux goes, Mr. President, you're not thinking of buying my vote because it's not for sale, but you can rent it, so let's talk. It was one of the great lines of... The other thing, there was a story. We were negotiating with the Chinese. They were sitting across on the table in the cabinet room, and they were having a hard time trying to figure out how they would accept what the president was talking about. And Clinton went right at him and said, well, this is how you sell it in China. And he talked them through, and they all, for the first time, because the Chinese would just read notes. You say something, they would say something. It was all prescribed. It was like checkers.
Yeah.
And they started laughing because, and the translator translates back to the president. He says, you understand Chinese politics, and many of his own advisors, but different things. And then the president, the biggest thing he taught me was, it's a lesson of what I think about politics, and these are not his words, but I think these are the principles, which is you got to be idealistic enough to know why you're doing what you're doing, and then tough enough to get it done. And if you really look back at the great presidents, Roosevelt, Kennedy, Reagan. I think Eisenhower underappreciated in this value. Lincoln. They were idealistic. They were great visionaries, but they were also ruthless. And when they needed to get something, they would see it through in capacity. And that's why, I mean, there are other lessons I saw him negotiate and stuff like that. He always reminded me, never confuse the means with the ends. Be very flexible on the means, very flexible, but never lose your North Stars or what your goals are.
You were running behind on the NAFTA vote, I believe.
Way
behind.
Yeah, like so far behind it was single-digit numbers, and you needed 218.
Well, how did you win that one?
So this comes at the when Hillary had me demoted from political director to special projects. I was given NAFTA, which was we had 6 weeks, dead bang loser, and it was seen that you had to get it out of the way. And Gingrich tells Clinton, we will only put our votes, 114. Those are the day Republicans were for free trade. If the Democrats would do 100, which was, call it 20 votes out of the highest number you could see on the page. And he purposely did it. But he said, if you don't, we're not doing it. It's when the Republicans were still in the minority and the Democrats were against the president. So he's, first of all, the first thing, scheduled it 2 days or a day before the president would leave for Vancouver for the APEC conference. So we made it a foreign policy thing, not an economics. And we said, you can't embarrass the president on his first trip overseas. And it was his first major trip overseas. So that backstop started to put pressure on Democrats. Because you cannot, if the president fails on his first foreign policy trip, you will be undermining the president for the rest of the term. So put where you scheduled the vote mattered. Second thing was then figuring out which interest would work. And we then started, there was agricultural interests, there were other things that we started marshaling. And one of the things you got to know about politics is momentum. You lose votes as you're failing, you gain votes as you're succeeding.
Yeah.
Nobody goes, hey, you're losing, let me jump on.
Right. I want to be part of a losing.
Yeah. And then we started releasing names of people that would go public. And the public announcement started adding its own momentum. As we started to gain, I don't remember each one piece, but then I will say towards the end we had this thing called, we made it and we ripped it up. It was called 1-800-NAFTA because I have to. And it was a joke. It was, we were accused at the time of trading to get votes, meaning things that all members of Congress needed, we were doing it. And so we put it like what those were the days that you had a catalog. So we put like little catalogs of things, and we passed it, and we passed it with more votes than I think it was ended up with 100 plus Democrats.
Yeah, boy.
But we built a momentum. We built a recommendation. The president gave a speech. The big other issue is we didn't make it about economics. We made it about national security and foreign policy. And if you go back and think about trade, I think the big mistake is you're never going to convince people on economics. You'll convince them on self-interest from a national security standpoint.
Well, you had a win-win-win.
Interesting, I don't mean to do this. 8 days later, we were, and the president, the best performance he had from inaugural day in his first year was after passing NAFTA. He went back up to 64% job approval.
64.
And we put down, 8 days later, we passed the Brady bill in the Senate. And we used that, and what Clinton also did great is he was willing to use his political capital to spend it. And he got, 8 days later, he got the Brady bill passed out of the Senate, even though we didn't have cloture if you looked at it. Now, that would have gone down had NAFTA gone down, even though they're two separate issues. Each vote bounces into the next vote.
Yeah, that's called momentum.
Yes.
It seems to me that that is a behind-the-scenes look at how politics should be played. It's not a game, of course, but you work it.
Yeah.
And you work both sides, and you gather the plants where they're growing.
I'll give you another example totally years later. Gingrich, this is the balanced budget negotiations. Gingrich is now Speaker. He says to President Clinton, this is when we're going to double the earned income tax credit. And that was one of the principles of the president. He had that, environmental protections, doubling the national parks, He had children's health care. But we also were going to take the earned income tax credit. You get, as you work, it basically pays you your tax. You don't pay income taxes up to about, right now I think it's 75, but at that point it was 50. We were going to double it anyway. So Gingrich says, I'm going to make it look like welfare. And Clinton leans right over at him. You got to kind of have that big frame of his in the chair. Gingrich is in the vice president chair. He says, Newt, that ain't a problem. Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk about these police officers, these nurses, and these firefighters, and these teachers. And if you want to call them welfare recipients, go ahead, throw me in that briar patch. And that's exactly what we did. And the next day, Gingrich backed off.
Wow.
And Gingrich told him. And a lot of things that people don't know about politics is not that it's choreographed, but if you're really working respectfully, even if you oppose each other, this is what I'm going to do to you. Mm-hmm. Gingrich said, you say this, you do this, I just want to tell you up front, we're going to make it look like welfare and you're going to pay the price. Clinton looked right at him and says, not a problem. Here's what I'm going to do to you. Mm-hmm. We that morning had a police officer, a firefighter, a teacher, and a nurse. The thing was, it was like a hot knife through butter to quote Bill Clinton. And by 3 o'clock, they folded.
Yeah.
And that was up front. Here's how I'm going to screw you. Well, this is how I'm going to screw you right back. Right. And it was over, and that's how it happened.
But you assume you go ahead and do your job afterwards. It's like laying your cards out on the table.
Yeah.
Well, you make it appealing.
Yes.
Politics is appealing, except for today. You've got a loggerheads going with Congress. Yeah. How do you feel out here, having gone through all that? You must...
Well, I think this is a manifestation of a bigger dysfunction, and that is worse than we've seen. We've had partisan bickering, but not dysfunction. I mean, I gave you an example of Newt Gingrich. We ended up working out the balanced budget agreement. The big issue, one of the big lessons I took, I was responsible with Bruce Reed and Gene Sperling to negotiate the children's health care. After big health care failed, we got the kids whose parents work but don't have health care. They weren't Medicaid, they weren't privately insured. That was the last item we got it worked to. But that was partisan bickering, and we got a balanced budget agreement. Today, you have partisan bickering without any product at the end. And
just for ego.
Well, there's I would find it hard to come to an agreement with this guy on a lot of issues. And I think that this has become more than just dysfunction, breakdown, partisanship. There's always been partisanship in politics. I remember saying, this is so partisan. Partisan's been around since politics. This has become dysfunctional. Oh. And that's a different element of it than we've ever seen.
Is it because he doesn't know what he's doing, or so desperate he's willing to go right to the edge?
Well, first mistake, never assume your opponent's a fool. I don't think he's a fool. I actually think, I don't think he's intellectually inquisitive. I don't think he's smart, but he's not a fool. And remember, he's in the Oval Office, and our team isn't. Mm-hmm. And so I don't assume he's a fool, and I think he's actually, a lot of times, as crazy as a fox. Mm-hmm. And he has a incredible instinctual read on his voters, sixth sense read of it. I don't think he's smart intellectually. I don't think he's inquisitive. I don't think he wants to learn. I think he has an incredibly short attention span, but I don't think he's stupid. Yeah. Not exactly the attributes I would want from all the ones I just told you I'd want out of a president. But that said, he's in the Oval Office. He knows his voters, and he knows how to keep them incredibly engaged with him, and incredibly, here's the thing about it. He ran as a change agent. He's sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and he's still seen as a change agent, even though he's in the establishment seat. Pretty smart.
And here the entire government can say no, and he'll say yes, and I'm going to show you. Mm-hmm. They'll believe me.
Yes. And he has discredited every alternative authoritative voice.
Everyone.
Including, no Democrat and other Republican ever would have touched the national security apparatus. From FBI to CIA to DNI, and he has put himself in the trust, and I mean this, of the Russians, and he's still standing. Nobody would have crossed those lines. Yeah. There are 3 separate lines. It's brazen.
Chicago's a political town. Everybody knows that.
It's our favorite home team sport.
Indeed. It's the conversation. Yeah. And actually, it's a glue that holds community together. I think it's why a lot of people who move here and just visit, if you will, feel that they're a part of it instantly. And it's politics, because the politicians are the stars. Mm-hmm. We really don't have the big celebrities running through town. Politicians are the celebrities. Why? Why is that? Could you sum it up?
That's interesting. I think, well, first of all, part of it, mayors and aldermen are bigger than life personalities. Look back at Richard J. Daley. That was, he was a bigger-than-life personality. He filled up the screen. Harold, a bigger-than-life personality. And that becomes then part of the office. We have one of the unique, mayor is both the chief executive and he or she is president of the city council. Very rare type of authority. They're the speaker of the house, meaning the city council, and they're the chief executive. That's a lot of authority attributed to one person, which then assumes that you got to be big enough, strong enough, authoritative enough to fill that position. The other thing is we've had personalities in city council, and they're not just, and I think Harold captured it, the kind of the essence. This ain't beanbag. And we, if the Bulls are playing well, the Blackhawks are having an off season, turn the channel, we'll watch sports. It's called politics. And it's a hard-hitting game in this town. And, as I sometimes say, we're not Phoenix. We're not Tucson.
Yeah.
This is Chicago, and you got to be ready for the all-contact, all-impact sport. And goes all year round. And the people that have held position in history had a lot of personality.
What do you wake up in the morning afraid of?
As mayor?
Yeah.
Since day one, the first thing I get around, 5:15, 5:20. Unfortunately, I know that. I get up at that, and if it's not in, it means something bad, is I get what happened overnight. And it's the first thing I wake up to, even before I see the papers or read is a shooting report by district. And that, you wake up like, if it's a bad summer weekend night, it's like, that's what you're afraid of because, that's the most elemental piece. And then more particular, more granular as a child. And I started, I would call it a practice, not a habit. When I was mayor-elect, I visited one or two children. I wasn't mayor yet. And I thought, well, you can't kind of do it then and stop. And I kept going. Whether it's living room, I've had families here, hospitals. I bring no media. And I just do it mainly as a father, not as a mayor, even though you're greeted as a mayor, because I'm obviously. And it's the worst part. It's the valley of this job.
Yeah.
Although, the other day, Nate Pendleton, Cleo Pendleton, came in and gave me a gift, and I asked them not to, but they did. And I've also had friendships that come out of it. But that's the part you fear most, and that's the part that,
Your demeanor changes when you have to talk about it, even here. And, everybody loses somebody and has a death in the family. You have one every day. It's
the deepest, longest valley. Parents have asked me to speak at the funerals, and I don't know if I could get up if, God forbid, anything happened to Leah, Alana, and Zach. I don't know how the individual parents have. I think they have incredible stamina, and all I can really offer is a shoulder, a hug, any individual help that they need. And also the sense that, what I do think, it's so unnatural for a parent to bury a child. It's one thing your parent passes away, age or other illnesses associated, but for a child, due to the harshness of our streets. So,
when we last talked, you were going to hire 1,000 cops, put them in those areas, and talked about investment, mentors and investment. Is there a secret weapon that will cure it?
No. So anybody searching for the thing will never find it. It's too big a problem that has too many parts to it. And first of all, we try to assume all shootings are the same. Some are domestic. Some are about drugs, market, corners, street
even
corner.
Accidents.
Yeah, some are about road rage. So you can't kind of frame it singularly, so therefore it doesn't. No, there's access to guns. There's a piece of it about police and community. There's a piece about it as jobs or economic opportunity versus despair. There's a piece about it about the rest of the criminal justice system, like a 14-year-old going back on the streets after a shooting with 6 more arrests than years. I actually consider it one of the things I wish I could have gotten to. You mentioned mentors. When I first talked about it, I talked about the role of family and faith. We don't have that conversation. It's too painful for a host of reasons. I may not be the right messenger, but I think faith has a major role, and I think we cannot be scared of having the conversation of the importance of faith in structuring our children's lives. Family is important. Economic opportunity is important. Jobs, access to guns that, I always say this. People say New York. New York has Connecticut, New Jersey guns laws. Mm-hmm. We have Indiana. I'll trade you Connecticut for Indiana. Does New York want Indiana? And so our police officers are taking a gun off the streets of Chicago every 50 minutes. 3 consecutive years, which indicate and manifest that they're doing their job. 2017, 2018, and so far in 2019. Every year is the highest ever in gun confiscation off the streets. Each year sets a new standard, a new high, and they're endless. Endless. Right now, in 2019, the police department is setting a record 25% higher than 2018, and 2018 was the highest in the history of CPD in the city of Chicago, and guns were taken off the streets. And there's tonight, there'll be shootings. There's no shortage of them.
Yeah.
If you want them, Bill, if you gave me a list, I can go to Indiana, be back in 25 minutes, and I can have you 3 of everything. You throw them in the trunk, and you can sell them. No. And that is what drives me nuts. Well, I told you about the Valley. I'll give you the Peak.
Yeah.
The Peak is the same thing. It's, this week I taught a class on the west side, my 8th grade civics class at KIPP Elementary. I've been doing it all 8 years. I did another one today at Skinner. I did a big thing, and I see these kids, all walks of life, talking. They're optimistic. They're talking about what they want to do for summer jobs or summer activity, and we have that. I did 2 things with kids that are going to community college for free. One was for the kids with a STAR who are going on. Another is the kids from high school who earned 15 credits a semester of college already in high school. That was 2 or 3 kids. We're now at nearly 400. 5,000 kids in Chicago Public Schools take college-level classes. And when we started, it was 300.
Wow.
And so the Peak is what I'm seeing our youth accomplish. The Valley is what I think of what our city has done to our youth. And so, but I am optimistic about the future of the city because I actually think we've proven to ourselves we can handle and tackle big things.
Yeah. Well, the thing that may keep you going, I experience it, is that you're bogged down by the headlines of the violence, but all it takes is to run into some of these kids, straight A's. Yeah. I mean, they're stunning.
Yes. Well,
you say, why don't you be mayor right now?
I read it. There was one young man, the reason I was a little late for this, from After School Matters, goes to Perspectives Charters. He painted a bench for me to thank me for, because every year we've added about a couple $1 million to After School. And I said, what are you doing next year? He told me he was a senior. He says, well, I'm going to go into architecture. I'm going to Cornell University. Game on, brother. Okay. Game on.
All right.
Yeah.
What if they get pigeonholed and, down in the dumps? How do you break out of that?
Now I'm drawing on my fatherhood, parenting rather. That famous Mark Twain quote? At 12, I concluded my father was a fool. At 18, I was shocked what he learned in only 6 years. I swore I would never do what my dad did, and I've done. So, I think part of being a parent is exposing your kids. So they, this gets back to, I've repeated this, kids cannot be what they cannot see. And if you expose them to a lot, they can start to imagine what they can be.
Yeah.
That's true about kids if they come into downtown or they come in to other parts of the city. And when the other thing is they have to have the biggest thing, what is summer, your first job, remember it. I remember my first job. All this is about giving kids the confidence in themselves. And part of what our after school or our mentoring or our summer jobs is it about a paycheck? Is it about experience? Yes. In the end of the day, the essence is about their confidence in themselves and their discovery inside, not their discovery outside. And if they get in a dump or whatever, one, you got to be available to talk to them, but 2 is make sure that they also, not glibly, but give them the confidence in themselves that they'll get themselves right.
You're an artist. You danced, and I was able to interview Ansel Adams in Yosemite. Can you
Really?
imagine? Yes, I'm that old. But
That is that must have been something very special.
it was. I said, what is art? Because he was writing about it all the time. And he said, art is when the outside meets the inside to produce your art. Well, in many ways, politics is that.
100%.
Athletics is that. We develop that, we educate, but ultimately it comes down to you have to internalize it. Is that the advice you would give to kids?
Internalize the outside? No, here's what I'd say. I think I'm big about this. You don't know at 18 what you want to do.
Right.
You don't. And it's going to come find you. Don't cut yourself off. My daughter's dealing, one of them, she had to pick a major. I said, well, if you don't want to pick a major, just talk to your advisor. Because in many ways, that exposure across a section, not just of topics or subjects, you're going to find something that has that tickle, that has that extra. And that's, to me, everybody calls it something that make it a vocation that's not just. And I think we sometimes force our kids too quickly in life to do two things. One, to grow up way earlier than they're morally capable. And the second thing I think is we ask them to identify what they want to be when they grow up much earlier than we've given them a chance to explore a lot of things. And those outside things become something inside. There's nothing outside. Something happened growing up around social activism that triggered social activism in a Jewish home that triggered my interest in public life. And originally, because my dad was a pediatrician, I thought it was going to be early childhood education. It was because of a campaign one summer as a driver. I got exposed to something, and all of a sudden, all this other stuff in my background with my family came rushing forward, and it's been what's driven me from that summer job.
But you see, you had the tickle.
Yes.
That's what everybody should want and hope for and be working for. I feel sorry for young men who go into law because the dad went into law, and suddenly they realize after an 80-hour week briefing cases, I don't like this.
Well, I'll give you, there's a little clause. He said it publicly, so I don't think I'm exposing anything from my brother. My brother went into medicine. He likes the public policy of medicine. He likes medical ethics and everything but practicing medicine. As I said, it's good because your bedside manners stink, Zeke. But that said, that's you got to let people explore a little, and you also got to let them fail. Hardest job as a parent, letting your kid fail.
Yeah. Take your hands off and let them go. Can you remember the first time you met Mr. Obama? Yeah.
He was a state senator. I just become a congressman.
Could you see the essence of greatness there?
I don't know if I would say the essence of greatness a la the presidency, but you knew that he was destined for something more than a state senator. That for sure. And he had not only, and I don't obviously think ambition's a bad thing. You've never found somebody without ambition who's made it.
Yeah, right.
That's a driving factor that lets you get through a lot of headwinds. But you knew that he was only in the beginning parts of what would take him to greater places. Bill Clinton was at a different point in his career, governor, et cetera, which is a natural office. Senate, Barack Obama is the first president since John Kennedy to come out of the Senate. Governor was a more predominant office, or vice president. And so you knew when you met President Obama, he had a thing where that would go. You couldn't sit there when you first meet him and say, well, here's the first African American that's going to make it president. But you knew he was going to be a player.
Yeah. Do you think Clinton and Obama were born for the highest office?
No.
They had to work on it.
Yeah, look, you got to. Bill Clinton, obviously, from the time he says it in '92 in the convention, when you have that famous video where he meets John Kennedy, and that sparked something. And do I think he then started to plan for a life in public life? Yes. Do I think he had ambitions larger than? No. When you think about it, think about this. Arkansas, I asked Bill Clinton once this. Arkansas produced him, Fulbright. At that point, there was Senator Pryor and Bumpers, who both had national. Right. I said, how does state of 4 congressional districts, which is 2 million people, produced people that Fulbright and Clinton that changed politics. And he goes, when we were growing up in Arkansas, there were 100 families. It was still kind of, he would never say it's plantation politics, but that really controlled all the economics. And if you were on the other side of the tracks, the only way you got on the other side was through public life. Mm-hmm. And it produced a certain amount of grit to get from one side of the tracks to the other side of the tracks. And public life, public service, was the only way you could do it. And I think, I wouldn't say they were destined for the Oval Office, but they were destined for greatness. Mm-hmm. And that happened to be, they landed in the Oval Office.
You have models to which you want to aspire. You have support of the community. It's their playing field. Mm-hmm. You have the Mount Rushmore of pictures hanging in your office. Mm-hmm. I think it's Dr. King, Churchill, Gandhi, is it?
Bobby Kennedy.
Lincoln, Bobby Kennedy.
Lincoln.
Could you pull some genius lessons from those?
Well, I'm a big reader, as you, so I'll give a couple things. One is I do think Lincoln's the greatest president we've ever had. Because every time he stumbled, he figured out a way. I just finished a great book about him called Becoming Lincoln. And I think he understood the poetry of the presidency. He understood the raw politics of the presidency. And he had a principle. And he was able, he didn't start the war for freedom and ending slavery. But in the middle of it, he understood it was both necessary to win it and necessary for the country's future, that it be defined that way. Churchill, through sheer force of will of personality and ideals, confronted Nazism when America was still dilling and dithering. And it's an amazing story of a person who is, he has one of my favorite quotes about, jokingly quotes, he said about a fellow cabinet member of the coalition, labor member, he said, he has none of the vices I admire and all the virtues I detest. But he, by sheer force, you could argue not only saved the world, but he could see around the corner when you think about his speech about the Iron Curtain. It was before it really emerges, but he sees it. Bobby Kennedy, there's a great line in a book about Bobby Kennedy is a lot more like Lyndon Johnson than anything. That's why I think there was such contempt they had for each other. But Bobby Kennedy was an idealist wrapped in a pragmatic cover. And John Kennedy was a pragmatic wrapped in idealist covering. And they were kind of mirror images of each other. A lot of people say, Bobby Kennedy emerges later. I actually think he was always there, but anyway. And then I think Gandhi, I'm fascinated with because he is an inspiration to, I think, one of the great leaders of our country who was non-elected, and that's Dr. King. And his pacifism, his nonviolence, taught a way to confront power with something that people didn't identify with power. And that's fascinating if you're a student of power.
We've got a long time here, but I haven't talked about the thing I think is the greatest achievement, and that's your guiding this biggest building boom in Chicago history. I mean, they're sprouting like corn stalks out there. And you filled them all. And Riverwalk is the jewel in the crown of the Millennium Park. So would that be the biggest achievement, or?
No, I think our kids are, I don't want to go through the metrics of graduation, which is 7 consecutive years of record height or whatever, but I will say this, our kids, you can physically see the buildings. Spaces that were empty, like the post office coming alive. Wolf Point that had nothing now has 3 buildings. You can see the airport, you can see the Riverwalk, you can see the parks and playground, you can see the bike and running path. Those are physical. You'll never know the young man I met that's going to Cornell. He won't be as present in our lives as the Riverwalk. But I know the difference of graduating high school rather than dropping out, and I know the difference of thinking about college than thinking you're not worthy of it. And to me, the biggest legacy is giving our youth back their possibility in their future. Made a lot of tough decisions, made some people angry, but you can't do big things making 100% of the people happy. That said, I do believe we figured out a way to make all that greatness of growth work for more and more people than just the people that work in it.
Well, that's That's very good. So, what would you hope the Chicagoans remember you for?
Here's what I think, that I set out a goal for a city that had lost its swagger because of the weight of the fiscal, the educational, all the challenges that mounted. I say this jokingly, but when I ran, a lot of people used to say, why do you even want this job? I mean, it became, only 4 people applied in 2011. It's the same job. In 2019, 26 people applied. So that tells you that we got our game back and we got our confidence back that we can handle this. And when I made my pledge that we were going to do the hard things and tell you the hard truths and do them, we kept our word, even when I did things at great political risk, even though I do believe in the end of the day they were the right things to do. Mm-hmm. I could have avoided them and be, quote unquote, better off politically, but the future of the city would not be. And I was willing to spend and be fearless in doing it. And my own view of this is, in the end of the day, it's not about being liked. It's about being appreciated for that you took the courage in a time of timidity about politics to do the right things.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
One final little game.
Yeah.
We have a lightning round.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and you can just make it a yes or no. Or,
I'll give it to you.
Or hit me.
Okay.
Lake or river? Your favorite?
River. Except for when I'm biking out on my bike trip, and then it will be the lake. But the river.
Cubs or Sox?
Cubs.
Why?
Well, one,
are you an outsider?
I'm a 7 blocks from there. Under my tenure, they won, and I'm a Cubs fan.
Deep dish or thin crust?
I have to be on thin.
Me too. You can caulk windows with deep dish.
Yeah, and I'm thin. I think I didn't realize until I interviewed Steve Jelinski how many different pizzas we have here, and thick is what we're known for. But we have a lot of 14 different styles. But thin is Napoli's is my favorite.
Good. 12-inch or 16?
16.
Because it's easier to hit?
Yeah, well, it's easier to hit. It's easier to hit and harder to catch. And if you don't have the girth to do it, 16's my hit.
And Sears or Hancock?
I am a Hancock fan.
Really?
Yeah. I think it represents Chicago. Big, bold, strong, and present.
That's great. This is one of my best interviews.
I do. Will you do me one favor?
Yeah.
I want your Ansel Adams interviews. I don't know where I find it. Where do I find it?
No, it's so old, 1972, something like that. But I'll look it up. I'll try to find the clip.
Yeah.
Because it was, a giant. It's been
fun.
Let
me ask, hold on one second, Bill.
Uh-huh.
First of all, I want to thank you. I mean, you have a very unique and distinct voice. You've brought Chicago back to Chicago, and I want to thank you for your journalism years and continue to be involved in the city.
Well, thank you. I want to tell you one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You did a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Proud of you.
Thanks for hosting this.
Thank you. Mayor Emanuel on the perhaps final episode of the Chicago Stories, and it's the big one. Thanks for listening.
Great.
That's good.
You've been listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Rahm Emanuel. This podcast is produced by Grace Chung, Carl Gutierrez, Jonathan Norton, and Lalo Alvarez. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. This is Larry Langford. Thanks for listening.